Chapter 27. The Tide Has Come Back In. I can answer that, Zara broke in, settling up next to Jude. Corporate Congress was not happy about the money Connor spent fighting Appalachia and the GSA. It looks like they finally grew a spine and realized they also answer to the people who buy their products. My source says they got nervous about potential boycotts after the fighting. They know how angry people were to have their elected officials pushed out, and they want to come out as the good guys now that the regional governments are back. Believe it or not, they just voted to rescind President Connor's war powers. They said specifically suspending the Senate was a war power, so they have ended the suspension and are calling the Senate back to the chamber. A stunned silence filled the screens as the senators had to pick up their chins and regain their composure. Did the corporate Congress finally stand up to the president? Was the government starting to function again? I'm excited, but I'm also cautious. This could be a sign that the corporate Congress will be more receptive to our demands in the new Constitution, Jude said. We also need to remember that President Connor is not going to throw up his hands and call it a day. He will respond, and we need to be ready. He still has General Alvarado and the Patriot Guard. I'll talk to the 9, and they'll do a thorough sweep of the Senate chamber and offices, as well as maintain a close security detail for each of us. Let's get ready to return to Washington. We've got a lot of work to do. Here are some insights. For context, if you haven't read the chapter, a lot has happened. Basically, the operation worked. They divided and conquered, and they basically lured NADF troops into certain open areas, and then in plain clothes, the RDF, used sort of camouflage and disguise, and they appeared like citizens, and they used stingers to basically take out NADF troops from within a crowd where they had no idea where the stingers were coming from. They had really no way to resist. I mean, they were hit with the stingers, then of course they were knocked out, and basically piece by piece, soldier by soldier, they drug off the NADF troops, and they stripped them of their weapons, and basically kind of just coming out like guerrilla warfare, but in civilian clothing, And anyway, this was really effective in two ways. First of all, it was effective because the NADF just couldn't tell where these stingers were coming from. They couldn't tell who the RDF was. They couldn't tell who they were fighting. And so they were kind of just sitting ducks. But also, after they were captured, they weren't killed or hurt or tortured. They were told, hey, we're just resisting because our elected government was taken out and we're putting our elected officials back into place. And so they did that. And what happened is region by region, as the NADF was defeated and detained and their weapons taken away, they realized that, the tide had turned, and the only way to resist would be like an armed conflict and basically going back into civil war. And after seeing everything they see and seeing everything, the way it went down and how it would have to go down for them to fight back, they basically resisted in mass. They said, no way, we're not going to fight our own citizens, because they saw that this was a power play by President Connor. Like, no, we're not doing this anymore. We need democracy back. We want our elected officials back. And so the elected officials, the governors and the legislatures, were brought back into the regional governments. And, seeing kind of the tide turning, the corporate Congress, which really kind of answers to the large corporations, the companies that employ most of the people in the country, they finally said, hey, this is not going the way it's supposed to. We're going to be at risk if people start boycotting. They really don't have a ton of power, but, even a small boycott could really affect our revenues. So, they're wanting to get on the right side of history. So they're deciding, hey, wait a second, this has gone too far. Okay. The regions have their government back, and that's the way it should be. And so they kind of break with President Connor and they say, hey, okay, enough of this. No more war powers. The transition is over. You're taking it too far. And they basically kind of see the light, that the Sparrows have been trying to show everybody. And the corporate Congress says, no more. We've rescinded those war powers. The Senate is still part of this government, and they need to come back. And we need to restore order. And so the tide really has come back in. But remember, the President Connor is not just going to, throw up his hands and give up, and he still has the Patriot Guard, and he still has Alvarado. So now that the government is somewhat functioning, the Sparrows the Senate is ready to come back and to get back to work. But they weren't called back by the president. They were called back by the corporate Congress, and the president doesn't want them there. So What do you think's going to happen when they show up to work? And what do you think will be waiting for them? Well, let's find out in Chapter 28.